Hey guys, how you doing? This is a comprehensive, complete DIY video build of the Morgan Barrel Sauna by Almost Heaven. It's a 4-person sauna, a really awesome sauna. And I'm going to take you from, it coming in the box to basically getting it up and running and enjoying it. These are some of the basic tools that you need. Pretty standard for any DIYer. So once you get all the tools together, you're going to start with building the base, which is really important. The base has to be on a steady surface, a leveled surface. You don't want any shifting. This thing's going to be over 1,000 pounds with 4 people in it. The base is made out of these cradles. So in this picture right here, the cradles obviously have to be parallel with each other. And also important is that there has to be a 5-inch overhang of the staves over the cradle, and the staves in relation to the cradle have to be 90 degrees or 100% perpendicular. And the first stave you want to start out with is that drainage stave. You can see in the video it has those 2 holes in it. And then once you identify it, you could screw it in, and then every other stave you screw in. You don't screw in all of them, you just screw in every other stave. And you use a mallet kind of just to get it nice and tight. And you work your way around the cradle until you completely cover the cradle with the staves. And as you can see in the video, and just to reiterate again, you're not screwing in every stave, you're just screwing in every other stave, and you're just covering it. You're covering the cradle, and once you cover the cradle completely, now it's time for getting in the front and the back. Both the door end and the back wall come in 3 pieces. It comes with the main piece and then 2 wings on either side, and you match it up with the letters. You can see over there AA, and then there's BB, and I think there's CC and DD for the back ends. And you just kind of screw it in exactly as I'm doing in the video. That's the easy part. You probably need another person to help you move these the front and the back of the sauna, unless you're super strong. All right, well, once you get someone to help you move the front and the back in, you want to make sure it's leveled. You know that you got, obviously the door is pretty easy to tell that it's in the correct orientation. Obviously the door is going to face outward. The back end might be a little tricky, so you can see me here, first of all, leveling it, make sure that's very important. Make sure it's leveled. This is the back end here, making sure that it's leveled. You can see the Almost Heaven Sauna logo on the inside, so that's important. Once everything's leveled, you can continue to build the sauna by adding the staves. At this point, also, you're transitioning from using those 2-inch screws that you use for the base to those 2-inch nails. So that's important to um to do correctly. You can see here all that obviously I'm working at nighttime to get this up. But once you work your way up halfway on the sauna, placing those staves, you can pause from doing the staves and move into building the benches. It's a lot easier to do with the top open, and obviously there's more light and more room to kind of move around and bring the tools in and so on and so forth. The benches are pretty easy. You're just placing them in, screwing it in, making sure obviously there's the support at the bottom is there. And once you're finished with the benches, you move on to continuing with the staves and building the and enclosing it. So now back to the staves. So at this point, halfway up the sauna, you're not going to be using any more nails. It's completely going to be just held in by tension. And you see that I'm using a ratchet strap to make sure everything's being held in with tension until we get those actual metal, those 3 tension bands place. That's really helpful to have. And here I am doing it on the other side. And just another kind of recommendation is to put a couple of staves on the top, um, to kind of hold the front and back end of the sauna in place as you're building around and enclosing the sauna. You see in the video that I'm getting ready to completely enclose the sauna. I'm almost there. As you get up to the top, a full-size stave will not fit, especially like the last stave. So they're gonna give you um different thicknesses, different size staves in order to kind of shimmy in there very gently. Obviously, with the mallet, you don't want to be crushing it or breaking it. I actually by accident broke one, so just to let you know that it's cedar wood. It's pretty soft wood, so and even the thin ones are going to be are even going to be easier to break. So once that's done, obviously you'll have a little bit of gap. I mean, having some gap between the staves is normal. With the tension band and obviously sauna use is going to help close that gap. And finally, you see me here putting together the tension bands. So the one thing that I really recommend not using when putting in when putting those tension bands and the screws or the full threaded rods is not to use a power tool, because for any of it, even to start it, because the power tool just way too much power and torque, and it'll rip through the threads, um and it'll be impossible to actually adjust the tension. Eventually, you'll have to cut it off, and I had to do that for a couple of mine because I used a power tool initially, and it destroyed the threading, and I couldn't adjust it further. So just use your hands and a wrench and to tighten it up. Just word to the wise, as they say. So the other thing with these tension bands, you want to place them equally apart so the tension is distributed across the sauna in equal force. So just measure out the length of the sauna and approximate the placement of the tensions. That's important to keep in mind. You don't want to over tighten either. It is soft wood, and the sauna also needs room to breathe. When you're heating it up, when you're cooling it down, there's expansion that occurs. So you don't want to over tighten. You want to have some room, some wiggle room for the sauna to move around during normal use. And here you see me in the video using the wrench. This is actually, I had videoed me using the power tool, messed it up, had to cut it off, sit there with a saw to cut it off. Really, it was tedious because I didn't want to cut into the cedar wood. So avoid yourself all that agony. I'm telling you, do not use any power tools. The threading is very, very delicate on these fully threaded bolts, and you'll just jack up the threading and have to cut it off. So just use a wrench over there, 2 wrenches from on either side to kind of make it tight. Again, not too tight. Just want to reiterate that point as much as I can, because I actually caused a lot of stress for me, this part, which it shouldn't. It should be probably one of the easier parts of the sauna build. Congratulations, at this point we've finished basically the structure of the actual sauna, and here just adding in to the LED lights. You can see it's being bolted. It's drilled into that 2x4 at the bottom. There's 2 brackets, metal brackets or clips that it sits in, and you bolt it into that 2x4 at the bottom. And you have the wiring. It plugs into a regular 110 outlet, and the wire can actually fit. There's like a little hole on the right side looking at the back end of the sauna, there's a little hole, and you can run the wire through that. You can see in the video, if you zoom in a little bit, you can see that's where the wire runs through. And then the other, just portion of completing the structure is the door getting in the handle. I had my daughter help me with this part also. There's, just little components that have to um, go together, so it's easier to do it with two people. Part B is going to be the electrical part, which is the heater. Stay tuned. All right, so this is part B. Start of part B is dealing with the electrical component, i.e. putting in and installing the heater. The heater that comes with this sauna is the Harvia KIP 60. It's 240 volts, requires a 30 amp breaker. It's a single phase. You can see the flow diagram over here showing the sauna wiring path. Obviously, you have from your breaker, that's where that 30 amp double pole breaker is going to sit. It's going to be, the wiring that goes into the breaker is a 10 by 2 Romex cable, so 10 gauge. It's an orange coloring, so that's a easy way to identify that. And then it goes to the disconnect. I use the non-fused disconnect. I'd call the Harvia up, almost Heaven Sauna up, and they said non-fused was fine. And then it goes into a flex whip or a conduit that's able to withstand that high temperature. You could get it at Home Depot, and I'm going to show you all the products I use. And in this conduit is not Romex. Do not put Romex into there, the Romex cable into there. You can use that 10 gauge THHN wiring. I got one single color of it and just color coded it with electrical tape. If you want to be you want to spend money on 3 different colors, you could, that's great also to do. And then finally you tie all that into the heater, and there's pictures and everything I've added to make this easier. Again, it's 240, so there's the black, red, and then obviously green wire and terminals at the heater. Here are the wiring components and the conduits that I use. The conduit that I use, again, is a 1/2 inch non-metallic PVC conduit, and I'll show you the push connectors in the next photo. And then the wiring, so I got the conduit from Home Depot. The wiring I got from Amazon because it's much cheaper on Amazon. I just use Southwire for the Romex and also for the THN. That is a reputable brand, and you make sure you get it from a reputable brand because you are dealing with electricity and it could be potentially very hazardous. And here are the non-metallic connectors. Again, the conduit is not metallic. It's a PVC conduit because metallic would not work in this case. And you see those connectors, you see the straps. I got the metal straps. Obviously, when you're tying it, probably plastic is better, or PVC straps are better, but when you're tying it in, just don't over tighten and damage the conduit with the metal straps. And obviously using the connectors properly. If you need the 90-degree connector, use the 90-degree connector. If you just need the straight 180-degree connector, you can use that to make sure everything's tight and the wires are protected properly. And then you also see the disconnect that I use. I use an outdoor rated disconnect, and even though it's indoors, I felt that just in case, it's always good to add a little extra money when it comes to electrical components. And then you have the 30 amp breaker. Make sure the breaker matches the panel. It's not universal, so I had an Eaton panel, so I had a specific BR Eaton, so I had to get the BR Eaton 30 amp breaker. So make sure you're comfortable with identifying what your panel is and getting the correct matching breaker. All right, so this picture, this screenshot kind of just shows talks about voltage drop. Again, when you're talking about running wiring from a breaker all the way to disconnect and then disconnect to the actual heater, length does play a role in it. If you're doing something like very, very far, if you're, if you're sorry, if your sauna is very, very far from your actual breaker, then or your panel, then you probably want to upgrade your wirings. Instead of a 10x2, you get a thicker gauge at 8x2. So obviously you want to consult with Almost Heaven, and I consult with them about this. Mine was around 75, max 75 feet. So I saw, 10x2 was fine. And you see on the other thing that's illustrated in this part of the video is, making sure your breaker matches the panel. It's not universal at all. If you've made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back. It's a lot. So great job. So this picture is showing the correct position of the heater. The heater is placed on the back end of the back wall of the sauna, and it used the 1.5-inch lag screws. You should mount the sauna 22.5 inches from the lowest point of the sauna. Again, the sauna is a curve, so make sure it's basically just take a measuring tape and just measure 22.5 inches from the drainage stave. And you can see that in the photo. And then it should be 15.25 inches apart. So that's where the screws get, screwed in. And it should be centered over the vent holes at the bottom of the sauna. You can't see in the photos, but you could definitely apparent if you just duck your head down. You could see that. And make sure the heater is leveled. It's very important to make sure the heater is leveled, and some of the LED light will be concealed by the heater. So I tried to actually video this part of actually making the connection and running the conduit. It was kind of difficult because you're working a tight space in the sauna, and I'll explain why you're working the sauna, and the heaters in the sauna, and so I'll explain as I go along. First thing you want to do is, once you get those lag bolts positioned, you want to put the heater on those lag bolts, mount it on, and get a correct, mark the position and where the conduit will run into the sauna. That's the first thing. Once you mark where the hole is, then just like in image 15, you make the hole and you pull through the conduit. You pull it more than you need to, because you'll be placing the heater. You're going to take the heater off the lag bolts. You're going to unmount it, and you're going to put it on the seat in the sauna. And that's really where you're going to work for the next 1 or 2 steps. So first thing, once you put the heater on the bench in the sauna, you want to open up the top and just remove everything. There comes with a whole bunch of shipping, manual and papers, and the most important thing you want to remove is that thermal sensor. You want to remove that out. It comes in a coil. There's a long metallic coil, and at the end there's a sensor. It looks almost like a meat probe. So you want to remove that because that doesn't belong there. And then you want to take the heater and put it on its side and remove the back plate, the bottom plate. The conduit, since you already pulled the conduit through, the conduit will, with the wiring, obviously you've fed the wiring through the conduit and everything's labeled properly. Your green, your red, and your blue, and your black wire, excuse me. So once you open up the bottom plate of the heater, you want to take note of the way the conduit's going to come into the heater. It doesn't come through the bottom plate. It comes in actually the back of the heater. So make sure to, and you see that in image 19. So make sure you're feeding the conduit through the back and not the bottom. So you feed the conduit through, use the appropriate connectors. I showed you what I got from Home Depot, and you make the appropriate connections, L1 being black, L2 being red, and then ground being green. You make those connections, and you screw in the bottom plate. Make sure before you screw in the bottom plate that thermal sensor also runs. There's a little groove that you can run the wiring, that green wiring, image 16. You can see that that green wiring, it runs from the bottom. The thermal sensor runs from the bottom of this heater to the outside environment of the sauna. So make sure you're not pinching the wire, and you're not damaging the wire. It is a pretty sensitive part of the heater. So once all the connections are made, again, I just want to review one more time. Image 19 on the picture in the video showing the wrong way to do it. The right way is to run the conduit through the back end, which is shown in image 14. So make sure that you're doing that. Once everything's made, you can put the bottom plate, as I said before, back on. Make sure the thermal sensor wiring comes out of the bottom also. There's a little groove that it will come out, and you could remount. You could push the conduit back, the extra conduit that you pulled through the hole. You could push that back through the hole, and you could remount the heater. And then at this point, also you can fill it with rocks. I did not go through that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You don't want to mess up the coils or anything, the heating coils. So you want to do this carefully, and you don't want anything, falling through into the bottom of the heater also, and you don't want to overpack it. So, there's images in the manual to show that, but overpacking it will cause the heater not to work properly, and you won't heat the sauna properly. So you need to give it a little breathing room, but you can see the images in the manual. And the next step now is to figure out the proper placement of the thermal sensor. Just to reiterate again, the connection to the breaker should not be made. The power should be completely dead. You're kind of working from the sauna to the disconnect to the breaker. Once, so just to get back into what we were talking about before, once the heater is mounted, you want to figure out where to place the thermal sensor. So initially, I had placed the thermal sensor in this image. It's about 14 inches or so from the highest point. When I use the sauna in that orientation, with the thermal sensor in that orientation, in that area, the sauna did not heat up properly to what I wanted to. It was max 170. I'm used to having a sauna around the 190, 200 range. So I actually moved it, and there's a second image. If you look at the second image, I moved it below those 2x4 crossbars, and there the sauna gets to exactly where I need it to get to. It's about 200 degrees, even more than 200 degrees. But once it gets over 200 degrees, there's very little health benefit. So around 190, 180 is where I like it. And you can always turn off. You can lower, the knobs on the heater. You can always lower the uh, the temperature. So in conclusion, the best place that I researched this on the internet, the best place is to place it under the crossbars, and you can see in the image the trim. You want to make sure to cover the wiring, and then obviously cover there's another metallic plate that goes over the bulb itself, and then obviously the wood guard that goes over the bulb also. So you want to make sure you install all those, the trim also, just to protect it. It doesn't have to be 100% covered, the wiring, but for the most part it should be wired. And don't kink the wires. It is a sensitive part of the heater. Finally, on to the last part, making the connection to the disconnect. As you can see in the video, you just it's 3 wires making the connection to disconnect, making sure the incoming wire from the breaker is also connected there. Again, the breaker should not be attached. And then you go down to your breaker box, to your panel, can make the connection to the breaker, and that's it. You should enjoy the sauna, and it's a really awesome sauna. I'm gonna hopefully make some review videos of the sauna. Really appreciate everyone watching my video. Hopefully it was helpful. You're more than welcome to message me if you have any questions about any part of the video. Thank you so much.